Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Virtue and Virtuosity. My name's Stuart McSkimming. Welcome. Today we're going to be looking at the bigger picture. For some of you who've been following this podcast series for a while, you might have spotted a narrative. We've been looking at broadly how technology, and particularly AI, can be more effective and within charities, and how we can adopt it successfully. We've had a real focus on some of the tech teams and some of the things they're doing out there. We started off with 3 episodes all around big charities, talking to the National Trust, talking to British Heart Foundation, and talking to the Alzheimer's Society. And we had some really good, interesting case studies, and there will be more of those in future episodes. In the most recent episode 4, we talked to a smaller organisation and heard a little bit all about what it's like to be a trustee of a smaller organisation, and also how smaller organisations can actually get on board with AI, because it's very difficult when you're a smaller organisation that doesn't have the strategic technology knowledge often that a larger charity will have in its access to all of the larger resources. In future episodes, we're going to be looking a bit more at smaller charities and what they're doing. We're going to be looking also to, we've got a really interesting episode all around some innovation going on in East Africa. We've also got going to be talking to some private sector organisations that are doing good, but doing it in a slightly different way to charities, to see what lessons we can learn there. But today we've got something a little bit different, because I wanted to take this step back and try and understand where charities fitted into the bigger picture around AI developing. And this will be something that's on the mind, I think, probably of some of the leaders in charities, and also some of the trustees, thinking about some of the risks around bias, which we have talked about in the past, thinking a little bit around the role that the charity sector can be taking as Gen AI develops. It's been tremendously rapid, the onset of Gen AI. It's only 2 years ago, I think we didn't even have ChatGPT really. But there's a big need, I think, for charities to be taking a role in how AI develops, to try and ensure that all the things that we've learned along the way get reflected in technology as it's adopted. Which leads me nicely to my main interview. It's something a bit different today, where I give the spotlight to Karin Woodley, the chair of the Race Equality Foundation. She has strong views and a lot to say about what charities, large and small, can be doing, and what big tech can also be doing to help humanity get the most from AI. I really hope you enjoy this interview. So, hello, and today I'm joined by Karin Woodley, who's the CEO at Cambridge House and chair of the Race Equality Foundation. I'm very pleased to have her on the podcast today, because I've been quite keen to get a different voice, someone from outside the tech sector, to talk a little bit about things, and particularly bias and ethics is what we're talking about today. Karin, really good to see you here today.
Yeah, lovely to be here.
And would you consider yourself an expert in the world of AI?
Absolutely not. I like to describe myself as a Luddite, but I realise that's not really true. But I've only had one knowing experience of AI, and that was to create quiz answers. So no, I know nothing.
Well, that's kind of what I was looking for. I was looking for someone who had some really good knowledge in a particular area, but was coming fairly fresh to the technology. And I've read some of your things, and you've got some really interesting articles you've put out there on a variety of different things. I'm really interested to read what you've got going on around radical listening, which was fascinating. But talking around ethics and AI, can we talk a little bit about that? So in terms of AI, it's we've got these large language models which have been trained on information that's come out over the last, I don't know, the last 600 years since the invention of the printing press. And the information being used to train large language models obviously varies, but so much of the information that's out there has come from certain areas of the world, from written by certain types of people, certain races, certain genders, and comes from certain viewpoints, which means that inevitably gathering all that information together without any forethought will lead to bias. So in terms of the wide range of sources that all the information for these larger language models is drawn from, Can you tell me, do you have any concerns about how it's gathering all the information and what bias that could lead to?
I think, I mean, it's probably useful to preface this the fact that, for the last 30 to 40 years, I've been working as a social activist, been trying to promote social equity, human rights, equality. That's my bag. And therefore, the idea that AI is using a kind of a historical collection of information for me just suggests patriarchy. It suggests, you know, educational biases. It suggests race biases. So all those things that we are still challenged about in society in terms of social inequity, and we saw social inequity really brutally during COVID. And it's just really frightening to think that the 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 exclusive drivers and the control of power and economics is going to be reinforced through AI potentially. I have no understanding of how we're going to ensure that we don't reinforce social inequity and areas of lack of social justice. Because even if you look at it on a global rather than a domestic level, there are such inbuilt negative assumptions and stigma about different people in different parts of the world, let alone when you start to look at it on a more domestic level, at protected characteristics, assumptions about if you're disabled, there is something that society wants to cure. So instead of thinking, taking a kind of human rights lens and saying that what makes someone disabled is not their medical or neurological condition, but the attitudes and structures of society, is a significant shift away from a kind of philanthropic care, aren't they poor people? How can we help them? How can we make their lives easier? Just all laced with a kind of stigma that reduces people to negative preconceptions and views. And when you get to race, well, we know that, AI can't tell one black person from another. You know, I, part British, part Caribbean, but my skin tone's really light. So am I Chinese? Am I this? AI is not going to be able to deal with those sorts of subtleties and differences, which, as a kind of, somebody who's working in charities, as I say, around social action, we're trying to dismantle those preconceptions about people. And we're trying to promote a society with equity and justice. My fear is that AI isn't being constructed in order to further those objectives because it's based on historical perceptions and concepts of what's right, what's wrong, what's equal, what's powerful.
And I think that's fascinating. I think the large tech companies will obviously be trying to do things to counter this, and they've invested a lot of money, and then we see lots of publicity around what they're trying to do. It brings to mind, though, as an example, is Google and their Gemini product that it had a lot of challenges when it was trying to bring up images, that it would be inappropriately applying racial attributes to people, and it just didn't work, and they had to roll back on it.
Sorry, there are similar image generating things that are really negative. So if you want to look at, say, the African diaspora, yeah, as it's been created through slavery, it's still the way it's taught in schools. It's a very negative experience. The imagery and the language is one of sorrow and all these, poor abused black people. But you can take a completely different lens and say, how did those slaves overcome the abuse and the transgressions of the West and find their own routes to freedom. So you see them as freedom makers and people who will challenge society and take on the enemy. But any kind of, you know, anything that's related to that kind of slave trade always negatively portrays Black people. And similarly, if you look at AI generated images of people who are living with addictions, yeah, it's always poor them, poor them, poor them. Well, actually, they're people who are living with something. They're not defined by their addiction. Yep, and if you want to then say, well, look at the addiction issues amongst judges, amongst medics, yeah, who are considered to be, good people in society, yeah, powerful people in society, you wouldn't sort of transpose that negative image. It's a stress related image. But if you look at the working classes and their use of drugs, it's sad. It's there is this whole language of depersonalizing and defining people in a negative way, and in terms of what we perceive to be the adverse, detrimental aspects of their life in compared to some white male utopia that actually drives our historical understanding of our society and the best place for power to be located in our society.
So just to summarize there, humanity itself is having problems understanding and often misinterpreting content, and there's a challenge around the application of our own inbuilt biases. So is the answer then that charities need to be investing more of their efforts into helping society and ultimately AI, so that those charities are helping with the better understanding of the experiences of the people that they're trying to help?
The charity sector arguably is already lagging behind, and that there is a digital divide that's already emerging between the charity and the commercial sector. And therefore, though I agree with you, the importance of breaking down barriers, etc., in terms of the way that we might perpetuate negative bias, preconception, and stigma through AI, that actually we also have to break down barriers to entry in relation to AI with the charity sector. So you can't ask the charity sector to improve AI when it has no experience of it, and when the current narrative is it can help you with fundraising. It might help you identify donors. It might help you with understanding your service user base. But, you know, most of us are struggling to even be cyber secure, even to have the appropriate digital technology, even to maintain up to date technology. So that actually we're already part of the divide in terms of access to AI, and that will potentially distort our understanding and contribution to the development of AI. So what I fear is that dealing with, hundreds of years of programming, thought programming, power assumptions, we're struggling to unpack that now, and that process to drive AI so that it contributes to better social justice and better equity is going to take a long time. I think you're right that charities need to be at the table. Yeah. You need to have civil society represented at the table. And there are undoubtedly going to be some parallels between AI use within the public sector and the charity sector in terms of service delivery, and quite often prioritizing same members of community or trying to deal with exclusions of particular members of community, or say health detriments that people, you can understand AI in health in a very particular way. And so there is a need to be around the table. But I think the charity sector is at a real disadvantage. We lack the skills, talent, and physical infrastructure to even get involved in AI and understand, design, develop, deploy. We might use it for external evaluations, but we're not too sure how to do it. So it'll be the big charities that are the least representative of communities who will be at the forefront of that. And the smaller charities that may have more kind of special interest focus, maybe have a more intimate service user led approach, have to be risk averse because they've got no money. And therefore, their engagement with AI needs to be thought about. So I would suggest that the first step is not for people with money saying, come along, charities, and advise us. It's for the AI world to look at how you ensure access for every sector, including the community organizations and that kind of stuff, so that the contribution that is made is slightly more than knowing, well, this information goes into, well, what's sometimes described as a black box, and this information comes out, but we don't know what goes on in the middle. We need to have a better understanding of how the algorithms are developed and an understanding of risk. It's very hard to ask under-resourced sector and inexperienced sector to help those with resources stop reinforcing existing problems in society.
I didn't interrupt you. I didn't want to interrupt you because you're in full flow there. But it's really interesting what you're talking about there. And I think what I've got stuck in my head here is it's about who's at the table. And I was rather simplistically saying we just need some of the larger charities at the table and with the tech companies. But I think what you're trying to say is you need a much broader table there. You need a wide range of people around that table if we're going to actually try and navigate our way through the introduction of AI so it benefits all of humanity and it takes the best bits of us. We don't want it to be all the worst bits of humanity. And if we're going to achieve that, which I guess is really, I'm putting this in here, and so it sounds a little bit like we're talking about inclusion. We need this table to be people around the table. We need it to be a very inclusive table where we are bringing all the best bits of humanity and the different viewpoints and the different ones that will enable us to do that. But how do we even start doing that? We can't expect the tech companies to lead that. Will government get a
Sorry, why not? There are business incentives for them to do it, big government contracts, global contracts. So you can expect them to do it. Let's really look at what the potential economic contribution that AI can make and what's driving people to invest in it. And that, if I look back to, you mentioned earlier, my interest in radical listening. Yeah.
yeah
If you want to understand false narratives, if you want to understand bias and the impact on people and how they experience it, all those things that have been edited out of our history, what is the actual impact of social inequity on people's lives? You need to talk to people who have experienced the negative outcomes of inequitable society and inequitable structures that perpetuate exclusion in society. Now, we know that the research that is done every time a new product is designed and placed, the focus groups, the huge investment in talking to people that takes place. So I don't think it's fair to say that those people who are investing in AI because of profit motive, that their profits will be better if they can support governments to promote better social justice. And why do governments want better social justice? Because the impact of things like health inequality, housing inequality, the disproportionate impact of climate crisis on communities is something that governments want to improve because it drains their treasuries. So there is the potential to do work where you involve the people who are likely to be most negatively impacted by AI. You involve them in the design, development, and deployment of AI, and you use them to mediate and to assess the outcomes of AI. Because you can't ask the people who benefit from power to necessarily know how to bring about their own potential downfall, or the fact they're going to have to share the resources that you could argue they've hoarded or kept to themselves. But there are, in terms of cost to society, benefits about understanding, and acknowledging bias, learning about it, extending people's, I don't know, their comfort zones, and having a shared responsibility for mitigating bias. And in my mind's eye, that with all the sort of regulatory concerns around AI that seem to me as a layperson to be based on it being deceptive or criminal or lying or whatever, that within the framework of trying to protect AI from doing harm, there ought to be space for it to look at how it will do social and human harm by reinforcing injustice and inequity. And I think that in the same way, we've argued that businesses do better, if they're inclusive and diverse in terms of their staffing. And that's not just in terms of protected characteristic, that's also thought, educational background, cultural backgrounds and stuff. And that benefits them in terms of the generating of profit. You could take that there is a similar argument with AI. If you take the responsibility for mitigating bias as being a social responsibility, it means you've got to be aware of bias. You've got to practice self-monitoring. You've got to have self-regulation, and you've got to be able to interrupt bias thinking and generate non-discriminatory data to feed the AI modeling. When you work in kind of sort of direct frontline service delivery, yeah, that's tackling, as I do, poverty, social lack of access to justice, social inequity, or it's the Race Equality Foundation, looking at the social structures that perpetuate racism, and you're seeking to dismantle them, you realize that, how distant the development of strategies and policies to break down barriers, tackle barriers to inclusion, how distant they are from the people who actually experience it. Yeah. You want them at the forefront. You want them to understand AI more than you. Yeah. And if you can get, if there can be investment, and was it that, what was that big AI conference? Was it at Bletchley?
Led by the Prime
Yeah.
Minister, Elon Musk, and a variety of people in attendance.
I mean, who wants to talk to Elon Musk about it other than because he's got cash, right? I want to talk to the disabled community about the impact that AI could have on them, both in terms of their health management, their health care. When you look at the sort of potential benefits around diabetes and all that kind of stuff that the AI presents, that there's a huge benefit to them. But also they're going to say, but no, this stuff that's churning out is actually alienating us. It's infantilizing us. It's, defining us as something other than the rest of society. It's defining us as non-contributing. Because if you think about the whole welfare benefits debate that gets knocked around, you think that there are loads of disabled people who are just avoiding work. That seems to be the kind of media narrative. But if you actually work within the disabled community, people want to work. They want to be functioning. They want to be contributing to their society. So the whole bias of avoidance and, people avoiding the workplace is just, it's bankrupt. It's just not true. And I can't see how you can actually avoid improving those things without talking to people who experience personal bias. And I know, as a Black woman who was a single parent and lives with a mental health condition, so, if I'm going to have protected characteristics, my backpack is full of them, that, the assumptions that people make about me and the way they might try and handle me or be courteous or just, oh, will you be all right sitting? You know, uh, the sort of bias that will allow somebody in an interview to say, well, will you be all right being on a committee that's always chaired by white middle class men? Like I've been zoomed in from another planet. I grew up in North London. I even married a middle class white man. People still think we've moved on from those things, but I had that asked in an interview in a charity sector setting about 5 years ago.
I'm going to bring us back to AI a little bit. Thank you, Karin, there. So the things I picked up from what you said there were, if we are to be basing our models on, for example, what's in our media at the moment, we have no hope at all. We are going to be all over the place with our bias, and yet we're lost. We have a very significant challenge. You've spoken a lot about transparency and understanding. People need to be able to understand how things are working. We've talked a lot about service user involvement as well, and something I picked up there was, I think there's a challenge which needs to go out to charities, which is that this is definitely not just sitting in the technology teams. This has to be an organizational wide discussion, because the areas you're talking about were fitting within our HR and people teams, thinking about EDI and thinking about how we actually work with our staff, with our beneficiaries, with the people we're trying to help, with our service users, or however we describe it. But also that sort of conversation then goes across a wide range of areas of charities. And so the more you unpick it, the more work you realize that has to happen. And there will be a point, hopefully, because I'm an optimist, there will be a point in 3 years, 5 years from now, when we will have got to a good place where we have actually incorporated ethically good, transparent use of AI into our organizations. But that journey is going to be a very bumpy journey, I think. We're going to learn a lot along the way, and we need to make sure we have as many people included as possible in that conversation to make sure we get there.
I do hear what you're saying. I can see from my kind of fairly restricted mind's eye that there could be AI driven automated procedures that will enhance the experience of people trying to access services, etc., etc. I can see that. I can see the use for analyzing the effectiveness of work and that kind of stuff. And also I can obviously see it in terms of fundraising and marketing and all that kind of stuff, but also in terms of assessing gaps in services and gaps in need and gaps and that kind of stuff. But some of the things that will make charities risk averse is their lack of ability to invest in skilling themselves up, even to a basic understanding and knowledge. And there's also, we've got to consider principles around AI safety and security and transparency. How meaningful is the kind of human oversight and regulatory frameworks? How do you protect and manage data, and how do you protect copyright, intellectual property, and all of those kinds of things? And the kind of skills, talent, and physical infrastructure that would enable charities to really engage and understand in a kind of practical, in terms of their own development, is something that I'm not optimistic about us getting the resources to do that. It'll be the really big charities, and not all, but a lot of the really big charities replicate state structures in terms of their organizational profiles and makeup and the level of inclusivity. And so I suppose I would like to see the charity sector be supported to invest in this, and also to have its own principles and ethics around it that can be contributed to the kind of more global and cross-sector discussions. I think there are different sections. One is you need equality of access to AI and the resources to do it. And as I say, the charity sector is lagging behind. So it lacks the skills and experience to make a valuable contribution to the development of AI. Then there's the piece about, how do we not reinforce systemic injustice and discrimination through AI? And that, charities could be very useful because they're very, what we're very skilled at is building relationships between other sectors and the people they find hard to access. You've also got academia in all of that. And, you know, I assume in the end this is going to be driven by government. And in terms of the commercial sector and investment, for them, the potential rewards of working well with government and maybe supporting government to implement.
So that's a good way to frame it. I know that I do have some listeners in big tech on this podcast. I don't think I've got any government listeners out there, but I think so bringing together the groups of big tech who we know have put billions and billions and billions into developing AI, and even a fraction of that budget would go a huge long way to start understanding how we can improve things. But bringing together the money and skills from big tech, bringing together the governance and the oversight from government, and bringing together the understanding of working with service users, for example, of large charities, small charities, and some of the smaller social organizations, bringing all those things together into a forum would be perhaps a good start. I'm trying to find a good way to end on a positive note here, Karin, as you can probably see.
I think that is a traditional start. Yeah. What I would say would be a more radical start was for the big tech companies to have philanthropic programs to help to support charities and not-for-profits to develop their AI capabilities and infrastructures, and to work in partnership with them to tackle issues around regulation, interpretability of data, and the kind of meaningful human insights and lived experience data that will help to improve and tackle historic biases that is already driving some of the AI problems and risks that we've already witnessed.
So I like that. That's a call to action for some of the larger big tech companies that have the money to invest here, to look at philanthropy all around AI and charities to try and kickstart something which they can do with their money. So really good call to action there.
And to come and talk to us at Cambridge House and us at the Race Equality Foundation. It's like start somewhere, make a contact. The one thing that the charity sector is really good at is being responsive and moving quickly. It's one of the sexiest things about the sector is that we're not always bound up in the sort of systems and procedures that delay things. Yeah. We're used to having to respond to emerging need. It could be really exciting. I mean, having sort of thought about AI for you, I'm really quite turned on and excited about it now. So even though I think it could be an absolute disaster, I'm still excited about it, which could mean I'm a reluctant optimist.
I like that. That's the mission of this podcast. Get chief execs turned on and excited about AI. So my mission here is complete. I'm going to say thank you very much, Karin. It's been absolutely fantastic to talk to you today, and you've given us some really great insights and a big call to action as well, which I'm going to note down in the newsletter as well, and see if I can get some people engaged on that. Thank you very much. It's been great talking to you.
Yeah, no, it's been really, really interesting.